Houses are very expensive because there's a lot of materials that go into them. Artificial intelligence won't necessarily impact that directly, but if we get robots that are able to build houses, you can actually reduce the cost of a house by 30 to 50% if you're able to do it without human labor, because again, humans are very slow and very expensive and prone to errors.
Mind Blowers, uncovering the mysteries of the future. This episode, How to Prepare for AGI with David Shapiro, Lars Tvede, and your host Daniel Kafer.
Welcome to Mind Blowers. So last week I had the pleasure of speaking to David Shapiro. I think I would call him an AI philosopher. And we talked a lot about how the economic situation and the labor markets would be after AGI. So one of the things we talked about was the speed of automation. So when will different jobs be automated? And we can see a clip here in 1 second, but what he basically talks about is that when things become better, cheaper, faster, and safer, they will be automated. Let's have a look at the clip.
If we take that principle, that observation from the past, that better, faster, cheaper, and safer, that generally drives economic changes in terms of what we do and what we use, and also what tasks humans do versus what tasks we delegate off to machines, assembly lines, and so on and so forth. If that trend continues, and if the other trends around, for instance, robotics and artificial intelligence continue, then one day, could be next year, could be 10 years from now. Some people still think it's 50 to 100 years away. Some people think it's never. But eventually what will happen is that cognitive labor and a lot of other kinds of labor that right now only humans can do, like plumbing and electrical work and particle physics, eventually it's possible that all of those tasks will be completely subsumed by AI and robotics. Now, of course, there's a lot of people that are super skeptical about this. There's also a lot of people that are very excited about this possibility.
So Lars, so basically what he's saying is that the automation will happen quite automatically as soon as these four criteria are actually a reality. So the second that robots or AI is better, faster, cheaper, and safer, we will see humans becoming redundant in that area and the machines taking over. What are your thoughts on that?
I think he's right on that. And I think from practical point of view, it's quite important to have the perspective of what we can expect in which order or which sequence. And I think also that we are at the late end of 20 absolutely magical years for AI. And in my mind, it really started around 2016, where chatbots really took off. So, you could get online support instead of having an Indian call center. You would have a chatbot doing text and perhaps also audio. And then we got the LLMs, and they came one after another. The first one was really not very good. But then, especially around 2020, that really astounded people. And then the next thing is you had Hugging Face, which is full of transformers and agents. I was just checking it this morning. So we have surpassed some weeks ago 1 million different models uploaded there. It's doubling around every 5 months. So if you extrapolate that, we'll have, north of 5 million probably by the end of next year. And these are all these special tools that can either see context or trigger events, so act on context. Then the next thing, which just started, which is what the industry is beginning to call reasoners. So this is AI which replicate what the psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls system 2 thinking. So this, you can say, this is the slow academic thinking that gives you high grade in universities, which is quite useless in 99% of your time, but super useful on things. So this is where you have what you call scaffolding, where AI can deliver very structured content, where you have a chain of thought, where it's one step at a time. It's reasoning. It's one step forward, and then a step to review it, and then perhaps a step backward to correct it, and then another step, and so on. And then we get physical AI, and this is of course the physical embodiment of AI. So this is of course smart cars. So you level for passenger auto drive will probably take off really in 2027, 2028. This beginning, in close communities with auto taxis and so on. And then we'll have level 5 auto drive 1 or 2 years later. In Germany, in the beginning you will be able to drive or auto drive on autostradas, so the highways, and later it will evolve into other areas. You have the autonomous drones, and then you will have the versatile robots, which are being manufactured by close to 40 different companies around the world, almost entirely in Asia, lots in China, Japan, and South Korea, but also a lot in the US, not so much in Europe, although there are some hot companies in Europe. And then after that, which are AIs that really take responsibility for their own work. So this would be like hiring a scientist or an engineer and saying, you're responsible for designing this engine or whatever the task is. And the AI can structure its own work and work in collaboration with other AIs, so work in swarms. And that, of course, will be a major change. And that's probably around 2028, 2029, where you really will have yet loss when you look at your emails in the morning. Maybe half of the emails are from robots and from AI models instead of from people. I don't know how that would work if they have had their own names or logos or whatever. I work a lot with Chinese people and they invent Western names. So I don't know if I work a lot with artificial intelligence, that each of them will also call itself Tarzan or whatever it is. Then you'll have the digital DAOs. So DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. The one we really know of right now, which is massive, is Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but there will be lots of other ones, and physical AI. So these are physical organizations that learn and adapt by themselves. And I'm afraid that the most prominent example of that will probably be autonomous drone war, where somebody presses a war and say, we are under attack, send out 5 million drones and robots and fight back. And I think that's about 2030 that really takes off. And then at some point after that, maybe 2032, 33, we will see quantum AI. So some parts of what AI is doing is boosted by quantum computing. So that's the sequence I see it. And how do I see that? I use the Supertrends engine, where we use AI to make predictions, but then we ask experts who work with the different things if they concur with that or they want to those predictions slightly. So that will happen, and I think he's right that once these technologies work, they will spread because of competition.
Thanks, Lars. So one other thing I discussed with David Shapiro was who has already been hit by AI, and he mentioned that a lot of people working for themselves. So that could, for example, be graphic designers. It could also be, for example, editors. When you write a book, today AI can edit your book, for example. So these were some practical examples of where AI have already made people redundant. Let's try and have a listen to the clip here.
So as I mentioned, some jobs are already going away, and the people who are feeling it the most tend to be freelancers. So freelance graphic artists, they're losing contracts to AI tools like Midjourney and DALL-E. Freelance copywriters are losing their jobs to tools like Claude and ChatGPT. So it's already happening.
So Lars, what do you think? Have you seen other groups that are already impacted by AI and starting to be redundant? Or do you think it's more of kind of that you talked about before?
Personally, I only know a few people who have been impacted in a hard way. And that is, as Shapiro already mentioned, it is in graphical design, and then it is not reading on books, but it is in text writing for commercials and so on, because AI is really good at that. So people are simply cutting these people out of the loop and doing it automatically.
So one area I think there's a lot of discussion about are artists. So, for example, I own a music publishing company myself, and I do feel quite a lot of fear in the industry, but I don't see so much impact, to be honest. And I also think that for example, copyright organizations are slowing the development down, protecting the artists and making sure the AI doesn't really take over. For example, it's not possible at the moment to take out a copyright on music created by an AI. So there are some legal differences there as well.
Daniel, can I ask you a question? So if I used AI to make music, I would, and if I couldn't take copyright on it, why would I not say I made it myself?
Yeah, so there are, of course, different tools that can detect whether it is from an AI or whether it's not from an AI. Just a little bit like text, right? So of course, maybe you can circumvent that by making different edits and so on. But yeah, that is a challenge, and I think it's a gray area as well. But it's also it's all in terms of the user. So, for example, if a company uses AI music for an ad, then that music will not be copyright protected. So, if somebody kind of copied the same music, it would not be exclusive to them anymore, for example. So in that way, we do see legislation putting a little bit a damper on the development here. Do you see any other areas where it's kind of the bodies delaying the automation AI?
The main delaying effect of government bodies is simply that they will not implement it themselves. So many modern economies have governments constituting about, say, 30 to 45% of the total economy. And when some people are super enthusiastic about AI and say that will lead to 20-30% annual growth rate, I think they completely underestimate the slack you will see in some parts of the labor market of a country. Some parts will run really, really fast. Some parts will avoid it or ignore it. So it will be that will have a delaying effect. The other thing is that inefficiency in terms of legislating about copyright can become an impediment to the rollout, because if it becomes unclear what you can do, then you'll have an enormous amount of lawsuits. And that, of course, can slow down things. So you really need to legislate in order to avoid lawsuits. So it's super clear what you can do and what you cannot do. And I hope that they will be good at doing that.
Yeah, so let's stay a little bit on topic here. I did talk with David Shapiro of politics and who is driving the agenda. So I asked him that in Europe, it seems the politicians are really silent when it comes to AI automation and when it comes to, for example, increased longevity, and they're not talking about how we can legislate, or maybe they are talking about like how we can legislate, but not how we can invest in how it will change society. So I asked him, is that the same situation in the US? And let's have a look at what he said here.
Yes and no. It's not as much, but it is. Private industry is pushing that here in America, particularly Silicon Valley. Google and Microsoft and Meta and everyone. That's kind of the narrative that they're. And I do believe that narrative, and I still get people ask me. They say like, Dave, are you worried about population collapse or those sorts of things? And I say there's two big reasons that I'm not worried about it. And so number one is longevity, which I know you just interviewed Aubrey de Grey. So people will start to live longer, hopefully sooner rather than later. And then perhaps even if regenerative medicine takes off, then people that are older might be able to get their youth back and rejoin the workforce if necessary. And I'm not saying that that people should work for someone else for centuries.
So what's interesting from this clip is that it seems the politicians in the US, it's the same as in the EU, for example. They're not really discussing the consequences of AI and increased longevity, but it's the big tech companies driving the agenda in the US. And in Europe, we just don't have that tech sector. Do you see anybody who is going to drive kind of the discussion of how to change the society to adapt to AI within the EU?
Well, I think that in married to a politician, a leader of a political party, and I know a lot of politicians as private friends. And my sense is that a lot of politicians, not necessarily the ones that I'm associated with, but a lot of politicians avoid the subject in public because a substantial part of the voters are really scared of AI. And if a politician comes out and say, we have to do this and that to promote the rollout of AI, they risk getting into trouble because of that. So I think there's more going on in the political circles behind the facade than what you see. I think it's far more likely that trade associations, so for instance, Confederation of Industries that represents lots of companies, will have a more positive and openly positive attitude to it and talk about how legislation can be as useful as possible in order to roll that out. And I think David Shapiro has one super good point. That is, he says we shouldn't legislate generally about AI. We should legislate about the products you can make with AI. And I think that's really the great way to see it.
Agreed. So the final part of Mind Blowers here, reflecting on the discussion with Shapiro, is, so what can we learn from this? What kind of advice can we give to our listeners? We have another clip here from David talking about the advice he's giving.
So number one, and this is not necessarily financial advice, but this is what I have always done, is number one, way below your means. I have, for most of my working life now, I've made well over $40,000 a year, but my living expenses have never really exceeded $40,000 a year. And that means that you learn to be happy with less. And I'm not saying you should a poverty mindset, but learning to get by with less, learning to save, that just leads to more financial security. Period. End of story. I think everyone should do that if they're worried about money. So by having a longer runway, you're going to be a little bit better set for future. Now, another thing that you can do is you can start to transition. So this is what I did. So let me just tell you my story. In 2019, when I started playing with GPT-2, 2020 GPT-3 came out, I knew this was the future. This is that everything is going. I started my YouTube channel. I started documenting all of my research. I wrote a couple of AI books because I said, I want to be part of artificial intelligence. I want to get out of old-fashioned information technology. I was a cloud engineer. So I was in technology and I said, this is I want to go to the new. And for people in technology, that's basically, adapt or die is kind of the mantra in technology. Your skills have a shelf life in technology. Whether it's a particular coding language or a particular platform. So we're just used to that having to adapt with the times. And I said, AI is the next big thing. Now, after 4 or 5 years of being in AI, I realized, okay, this is actually just the beginning of something else. So then I transitioned again, and now I'm actually moving away from artificial intelligence, and I'm working more on philosophy, working more on meaning, working more on, for instance, this conversation, which is looking at the impact that it's going to have on humanity over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And by the way, I'm still someone who says I want to lose my job to AI.
So what David basically is saying here is that, saving and investing is a good idea. So of course, you could have said that 50 years ago as well. I think it's an even more important strategy because I do think we'll see some quite turbulent late 20s and maybe early 30s before we get new mechanisms that could be UBI, but we don't know yet. And then the other piece of advice he shares is transition. Try to transition to the new. If I should kind of translate that into tangible advice, is learn more about AI yourself, because I think the first people who will be made redundant by people who are better at AI than they are. So the people who reject AI will be made redundant first. Lars, what are your thoughts in terms of advice? You're also an investor. So what would you be looking at?
3 things I think are useful. The first one is very practical. So try to identify something that you can use AI for that improves your daily life. Set a target. Let's say that you want to either save, for instance, 1 or 2 hours a week by letting AI do stuff you normally do. And if you're not quite sure how to do that, ask AI. It would be super useful, and you'll learn a lot from that process. Or you can also say, is there something that I can do better by using AI? For instance, We've just written a book, and AI made that book a lot better than it would have been otherwise, because while you were writing the book, you really had a dialogue with AI all the time, and it just perspectives that you would never have found yourself. The second thing is to prepare for a more wealthy world. So there's a trend growth rate in productivity in the world, and all credible predictions I see from investment banks and big research institutions point to that this curve will start becoming steeper now because of AI. Initially, we don't see so much, but then certainly it will start to kick in, and that's within the next 2 or 3 years or so. And that means that future labor will be, opportunities to make business and to do meaningful work will more and more be directed to what is in demand in a more wealthy society than we have now. Of course, there are lots of exceptions to that. The third thing is that many of us have to be uncertain about what will our role be in such a different market workplace. And so that speaks for saving up some money just in case you lose finding the right space for you. The one thing I wouldn't do would be to lean back and wait for UBI, so universal basic income. First of all, I think it's a horrible idea to not work, not have anything to get up to. And second, I wouldn't trust that we'll get that. I'm not sure that that any society will ever choose to offer that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that will help people who save and invest will be this more deflationary environment. And we have a clip here from David where he talks about the deflationary environment that we will enter into. So let's have a listen.
So technology is always deflationary, and with a big asterisk. So what I mean is, you look at the cost of food over the last, again, 2 centuries. If you were, working class 2 centuries ago, you spent up to, and sometimes more than 50% of your income on food. Now, even if you're working class, it's closer to 10, maybe 20% if you eat really well. Technology does generally drive down prices, and this is honestly the purpose of innovation and competition. This is one of the free market capitalism, is that competition forces companies to try and provide goods and services at a cheaper price. Now, again, with a big asterisk that you can end up with price coordination and other ways that the game can be broken. But innovation does increase efficiency. Artificial intelligence and robotics could also dramatically increase efficiency. Now, it's not going to be universal across the board. So what do I mean by this? We're already seeing dramatic decreases in prices of some goods and services. Here's an example. My book that I just published, it's on the behind me. When I started writing my book, this was before generative AI could make images. Played around making the book cover myself, and then I hired a professional artist, paid her $1,800 for cover art. It was good. I liked it. Then fast forward a couple of years, I'm done with my book and I'm ready to publish it. And then I go to market test different cover art. Well, now I have DALL-E and I have Midjourney and I have a bunch of other tools that I can use to say, okay, what do people actually like? What do people respond to? And I'm able to rapidly iterate without paying a human. It just takes a few seconds to make alternative versions of the cover art. And then once I find something that people like, then I do side-by-side testing. Do you like this original human-generated piece of work, or do you like the AI-generated work? And guess what? The market actually prefers AI-generated artwork over human-generated artwork, at least in the case of science fiction covers. So yes, the long story short is the combination of AI and robotics plus other downstream technologies, like if we implement more solar and figure out fusion and quantum computing. Again, those things haven't happened yet, but if they do, they could have many, many knock-on effects, or what's called spillover effects on the rest of the economy. But yeah, so we'll see some things will become 1,000 times cheaper, some things will become 20% cheaper. But that's kind of the pattern that I would expect to see moving forward.
So it's interesting what he says. I mean, so basically some goods will be incredibly cheap, almost free. And of course, there will be other goods that will decline in price, but not as much. Of course, there's the caveat that politicians could increase the money supply, reduce the interest rates to maybe zero to counter some of that. But not talking about houses, we'll get back to that. What are your predictions in terms of a deflationary environment? Do you see it as deflation, or do you just think that we'll go back to low inflation like before COVID, for example?
So I've actually written quite extensively about inflation and money supply, so I have lots of views on that. But to make it quick, what I think is likely to happen is that consumer price inflation, which is what you normally think about when you talk about the inflation rate, will go down and will perhaps become negative because of these technologies. And then as that happens, the central banks they don't want inflation below 2%, at least most of them don't, so they will start to produce more money. And then the excess money, if you call it that, will then go into to other things. So it will go into things you cannot make more efficient with AI, and that includes, for instance, prime location of real estate, collectibles. So any also things that you cannot ramp up production fast enough, like commodities. So you'll see asset inflation at the same time as you will see consumer price deflation. And these two things are part of the same story.
Actually, David Shapiro, he also talks about house prices. We can just hear about it in this clip here.
Houses are very expensive because there's a lot of materials that go into them. Artificial intelligence won't necessarily impact that directly, but if we get robots that are able to build houses, you can actually reduce the cost of a house by 30 to 50% if you're able to do it without human labor, because again, humans are very slow and very expensive and prone to errors.
So what he's basically saying, that building a house will become a lot cheaper. That does, of course, not mean that house prices will collapse everywhere. But what are your thoughts here? I mean, you could make the argument that especially some commercial real estate, like office buildings, for example, would be in trouble because people are working more from home, and combined with prices for building new office buildings, they might decline. What are your thoughts here?
Well, we have seen this effect on office buildings since COVID. So I think we might have seen most of that already. But what he says, though, speaks to a view that I've expressed many times, and that is that in general, when you buy property, you can expect that the value of the land goes up, but the value of the building goes down. The value of the building goes down because it becomes worn down and becomes old-fashioned. And I've been through that cycle myself many times, because when I have made or renovated a building, I always thought that it's like non plus ultra. It's fantastic. It's got everything you can possibly expect to want. And then 10 years later, there are some new technologies I was not aware of would come, and then I want to renovate. So the fact that you can build cheaper and cheaper because of new technologies, which I think is a very valid point, and I've read specific reports exactly about that, speaks to the fact that the building will decline in value, but at the same time, and partly for the same reason, the land will increase in value. And that means you have to look for location.
So let's try and wrap up with our advice. So definitely save and invest. The dividends of investing might be quite high, especially if we have a situation with low inflation and low interest rates and nice growth at the same time. And then there's the whole re-education part, maybe transitioning to your labor of love. The only thing I would say is that I think for many people, jumping from a well-paid job to their labor of love may not actually result in an increase in income like David experienced it. You might need some runway. So I think that's another reason for investing and saving. And then again, real estate. I think a lot of people have focused a lot on either paying off their own real estate, which might still be a really good idea, but I think in terms of real estate investment, what you're basically saying is be cautious about the location.
Yeah, that's correct. And you might even see something that sounds odd, and that is that if a society becomes more wealthy, people can afford to move from the countryside into the cities. So the cities will be built out, and the countrysides will lose value. Property on countryside will lose value because the society gets more wealthy. An extreme example of that is in China, where hundreds of millions of people have been urbanizing, and that means that there are no buyers at all whatsoever for the properties they left behind, but they moved because of and contributing to the increased wealth in society.
David talks about that he moved out of a more expensive city actually to the countryside because he's independent on actually lives, because he doesn't need to show up to an office. Do you think that will balance that out a little bit, or do you think people just want to live in cities also just for the activities and the entertainment there?
I think that it will balance out a bit, and I think what happens with transportation in the future will help it balance out. So first of all, auto drive, where you can just goof or read or sleep when you're driving, will make it easier to live far away from everybody, but you still want to go and visit the cities from time to time. And also vertical takeoff and landing aircraft will also that. So for instance, in Europe, there are lots of amazing castles for sale very, very cheaply in Scotland and so on. And they're very attractive. The point is, people don't have time to go there. But if it becomes easier to move, then some of these will gain value. But then they have some attraction about something attractive about a location.
Okay, so I think we can sum up and say that in terms of real estate investing, it's quite complex. Will happen. Maybe like the pure A locations would continue to increase, but beyond that, it's challenging to say. But education, understanding, and using AI is definitely important, and investing and saving to have a strategy during a more turbulent time with AI automating a lot of jobs away are definitely valid advice at this point. Thanks for coming, Lars.
It was a pleasure.